People haven't changed for 3,000 or 4,000 years. I considered that when I first started. I thought about the cliff dwellers and the nomads and what people really are, psychologically and every other way. They want to be free, but they want a little shelter. And you don't have to have velvet cushions. When I first came here, there were architectural students asking me, how I like Los Angeles and what would I do? And I said, what I'd do is go up on Mulholland here and make giant concrete balls and roll them down the hills. That would get rid of Hollywood and Vine and all of the junk that's here, and then you could do something. My main feeling and purpose really is, since I'm involved with man-made environment, is to create the most desirable environment to improve human life, no matter what the purpose, whether it's a house or a factory or a restaurant. It's not designing to suit bankers or building codes or contractors. It's designing for people. One of the most important things in all of architecture is timeless, enduring space.
The message of architecture is one of the most fascinating in the world because you can't escape. You are in the message. You are not receiving the message, but you are inside the message. Significant architecture is the one that produces messages that grasp you. Where? In the mind, in the heart, in all your body, because space envelopes you. Space is behind you, is on the side, left side, front.
Lautner's work, I think, is probably sort of in an extreme way, completely idiosyncratic. It has to do with his view of the world and how the world should be ordered. Seemed to find a source inside of him, and I think that's probably why his work was more compelling to me as a youngster. Not knowing very much about architecture intuitively, I felt compelled to continually climb up the hill to see this house with my friends. The reason his work, I think, is so powerful and so overwhelming is because he has the strength of character and the courage to produce things in ways that no one else has the courage or is capable of producing. Being a practicing architect myself, just knowing what it takes to get 4 square walls up and keeping the rain out, and then trying to convince people to let you do that. Lautner has this unique ability to continually put up structures that somehow push the limits.
I think the difference between John Lautner's work and the work of other architects who are interested in this indoor-outdoor relationship is that Lautner's buildings are more like landscape in themselves. They're more like a series of hills or ocean waves. They define space differently. They don't box in space so much as they kind of cup space or give you some degree of shelter while still allowing you to participate in the landscape.
To do real architecture, you're creating a whole environment that's desirable to live in or work in. The shelter incorporates all of your emotional as well as physical needs.
You feel, in a sense, as if you're rejecting the artificial Western tradition of architecture and returning to the source.
Right. The Arabian tent, they had hanging carpets for partitions. So they had movable partitions 3,000 years before some company started making them here. You know, that's not a new thing. They made partitions into fancy facades. Then the architecture started to deteriorate into styles and facades.
This notion of returning to primitive forms, creating the mythic object by rejecting, in a sense, historical traditions in favor of a return to origins, is not a new concept, in a sense, although it is handled in a different way by Lautner. But you can go back to the first text on architecture, Vitruvius, and he talks about the primitive hut as the model for the temple.
The Lautner style is hardly individual. It draws its inspiration from a number of sources common to his time. He is a true modernist in the uncluttered way his buildings honestly express their structure.
I was born and brought up in the woods and lakes of northern Michigan, and my father was a professor and my mother was a painter, and I helped my father build a cabin on Lake Superior when I was 12 years old. So I got interested in building really when I was 12 years old. I took all kinds of subjects in college. I took physics, chemistry, astronomy, philosophy. I got a real liberal arts. And in the whole process of the 4 years, I was thinking of different professions, and it seemed to me that most of them ended up in a kind of a routine rut, that they did the same thing over and over, and they became boring. So I finally discovered Frank Lloyd Wright starting the apprentice training for architects. I took drafting when I was in high school, and I couldn't keep the pencil sharp. I couldn't make a neat drawing, and I knew the typical school, all they do is grade on neat, and then to hell with the ideas. And Mr. Wright had ideas, so I went for that. He did create a real apprentice training for architects, which is not just drafting, it's building. He believed in it, which they do to a great extent in Europe. The Swiss and the Germans, they learn how to build. They do stonework and carpentry and plumbing and everything. Well, here, an architect can graduate from architectural school and he can't even hold a hammer. Sunday nights we had guests, like 30, 40 guests from Chicago or someplace, and string quartet and so forth. And apprentices would be in charge of the whole dinner. We'd cook and serve and clean up for 50 people. So when I design a kitchen, I know what goes on. Mr. Wright loved the total seasons that we had in Wisconsin. He had a previous client, Chandler, in Arizona. Chandler donated the living facilities, and at the same time Mr. Wright was working on Broadacre City, so it was ideal working condition for us to go to Arizona in the winter and work on these models out in the sunshine instead of freezing our fingers, you know. We did that for several years before Mr. Wright found this desert property and then started building a desert camp. In the construction of the camp, the first building was the vault to contain the drawings, and then the drafting room. Mr. Wright allowed some of the apprentices to build their own little camps, which is my first architectural design. Wes Peters, who is the chief architect now, and several other men went up to the mountains. They'd back a truck up to the mountains and roll the stones down on a flatbed, haul them in, and then other fellows would mix the cement, and I'd pick the stone and hold it in the form while they poured the concrete. And we'd do that for 8 or 10 hours a day, and we felt very healthy. That was really fun. I mean, exciting, real work. That's a lot better than drafting. When I initially went to Taliesin to study architecture, I wanted to do it from my own philosophical ideal basis. And I learned more about the ideals and principles and everything, of course, from Frank Lloyd Wright. After seeing the work of the genius, you have no idea whether you can do anything yourself. I decided that this was the time to leave Taliesin and try to get going on my own, even though it was depression. It was very difficult to leave such an ideal life. Then I came to Los Angeles, and I drove down Santa Monica Boulevard. It was so damn ugly, it made me physically sick. Mr. Wright had this client, Sturgis, and designed this house. He said I could come and superintend the building. I did all the work and got all the permits and arranged all the contracts and so forth. It was a very difficult time for anything and almost impossible for architecture, but I had no money. I borrowed a lot from a friend of mine who was at Taliesin, and I borrowed on the lot to build a house, and I built my own first house. I believed in doing what you say. I just worked the way Mr. Wright worked, by example. I used to drive Frank Lloyd Wright when he came from Arizona to Los Angeles. He saw that house and approved it. I worked for a contractor during the war. I wanted to know everything there that could be known about actually doing the contracting, because you had to know that in order to do anything. And if I hadn't done that, when the contractor comes in and says, you can't do this, you can't do that, or it's going to cost $1 million extra, they succumb. Well, I tell them to get the hell out, because I know it can be done and I know how much it costs, and I can do it myself. So that's very important.
The name of John Lautner is not generally known in the mass public, but the influence of his works is felt and known throughout the popular culture. In the 1950s, a style of coffee shop architecture developed here in Southern California, spread nationwide. And the main influence for that style was John Lautner's work. Googie's, Henry's, others of his drive-ins in the late 1940s and 1950s became the prototypes for the California coffee shop.
I did a coffee dance downtown on Broadway. I did one on Vine Street. It was the first time they were really made into human environments for simple fast food kind of things. And then I had another client who did Henry's. I did a whole chain for him, and they're all extinct now.
Googie's had done something that was very unusual. It was one of the first places that was designed for the view. First, the near view, which was people walking from Schwab's, all the movie crowd, and so on. Also, you could see in the distance the hills, the Hollywood Hills, right up Laurel Canyon. So it was one of the first places that was designed for traffic.
But with that steel frame and steel decking, it was the fastest, cheapest building you could get, but I made it into something suitable for people inside so they could look out to the mountains instead of looking into the garbage. And they, by turning up the roof, it had an integral signboard. Well, most restaurants and buildings would have a box and then they have a billboard stuck on top, so nobody ever understood it. But they made a lot of chatter about it.
The original Lautner buildings, Googie's in particular on Sunset Strip, was so powerful, so strong, so striking, that it gave the name to a whole style of architecture. These California coffee shops came to be known as the Googie style. A number of his buildings have been used in several movies, and it leads to an interesting speculation about the appeal of his architecture. It has a lushness, a luxuriousness, and an American modern style which serves well for mass audience entertainment.
Well, hi there. I'm Bambi.
Good morning, Bambi.
And I'm Thumper. Is there something we can do for you?
I can think of several things offhand, but at the moment I'm looking for Willard White.
Oh, Willie. Why, he's right out there.
And that's all there is to it.
Not quite. First, we're gonna have a ball. All yours, Bambi.
John Lautner is making houses that push the boundaries of what you can do with concrete and steel to make objects that are as unique, as exciting as possible. And therefore, of course, they're also the most exciting place to set a movie, an action movie, a thriller movie, a suspense movie, because these buildings are inherently thrilling and exciting just in their physical expression of space, of the building as an object. These buildings are presented as characters, as personalities in themselves.
Some, isn't it?
The John Lautner houses are about completely different issues than normal houses are. Normal houses are about providing the standard spaces, the bedroom, the living room. The John Lautner houses are about experience. They're about space. They're one of a kind. They are unique objects.
Thank you. Well, Sam, here's to a friendship.
Wait. Let's do this right. Come here. To Hollywood.
Yeah, to Hollywood. Man, what a view, huh?
Oh, I had a hell of a time. I had a hell of a time all my life. It's very disappointing to me, particularly when I don't get any public work or any commercial work. What we have now are committees, committee architects, and how the hell you can do anything with a committee is insane. It's compromise, compromise, compromise. I find that I get 6 or 8 a year out of 10 million with guts enough or interest enough to do something individual in architecture, who refuse to be dictated to by the banker or the builder or the real estate agent as a piece of merchandise. I feel frustrated a lot of times because I just say, what the hell's the use of writing about it or talking about it? You have to go and look at it, and if you can't see it when you're looking at it, you never will. I mean, I compare it sometimes like the old thing, if you don't know what jazz is, you never will. I mean, you can't define it, you can't catalog it. If you don't recognize it, that's too bad, that's all. When I first visited the site, I got the idea to build a large open terrace so that all you have is the beauty of the Acapulco Bay, the sky, and the mountains. You don't feel you're in a building at all. You're out in space with the beauty of nature.
The first act that you see in the process of John Lautner is the fact of breaking the box, of denying the box. That is the organic point, because the breaking of the box is an intellectual operation. But the moment in which you don't break anymore the box, because the box is no more there, then you become organic. Organic architecture starts at the moment in which the box is not there anymore, and therefore you create freely, can be born and can grow.
I've only been in John's office once, but it is not the standard by which the West Coast exists. I mean, it's the antithesis of showmanship.
I saw all of the toss-away stuff, all the ideas that weren't used, which were, many times as good or better than what was built. He would just, do sketch after sketch after sketch, whether it was like for a scheme for a garden or a cantilever deck off of a house or, some small section of it. It would be 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 ideas or more. And it was for every facet of the house, everything that he did. It wasn't just 1 or 2. I mean, he could do them like infinitely. He could just have kept going on with the same part of the house and kept coming up with idea after idea and never stopped.
He's a great example of what you don't have to be a good architect. John challenges you. He's always forcing you. He's just so focused on what he does. If anything that he's taught Angela and I, it's the importance of reading people. And he knows that if he can get you to understand what he's about to do, that the resistance to money goes away.
John is always, quote-unquote, the master. He'll give you a sketch, whether it's on a napkin or whatever, just a real rough thumbnail sketch, and his sketches are they're really incredible because they're really rough. They're almost childlike. Every line or mark is there for a reason, and it's to scale. Even though they're rough, they communicate his ideas. He'll give you this sketch, and then you're expected to turn it into a set of working drawings. Like you'll take it through a certain design point, and then he'll check it and revise it. There's a lot of working back and forth, and he's very open to new ideas if you've explored them and worked them through. So, there's nothing worse than going in there without being prepared.
You felt free while you were there in the office. He was activating all the energy that was there. He was not fighting your ideas. He let you go. That's a fantastic quality, to make you feel free and at the same time to guide you. The first time I saw him drawing, I thought, look at this carpenter. He was drawing like a carpenter. He was building while he was drawing. He doesn't give to the drawing any importance. When the project is in your mind, then it's not important if you draw it well or not, as long as you know what you want.
John is actually the most terrible draftsman I ever saw in my life. He's rather proud of it. When he was at Taliesin, he scorned the idea of perfect draftsmanship or even not a really good draftsmanship. John used to take a very soft pencil, like anywhere from an HB to a 3B, and would hold it in his hand like this. And I've seen him draw like that, laying the T-square along or triangle along the thing and draw a line like that along the line. And he's always, not only naturally, but he's even developed a scorn of fancy draftsmanship, because he always felt that wasn't the main essence. John has taken free form in many cases and developed entirely new interior space with free form, and He arrives at a true structural concept, and I think that's the same way that Frank Lloyd Wright worked. I mean, I don't think that, although Mr. Wright studied engineering to a certain extent, his really great thing was his sense of structure.
I think I've developed that over the years, is a real sense of valid structure, to the degree that when I do a whole new scheme and I give it to an engineer that I'm working with, he agrees that it's a sound concept, even if it's radical.
The thing that I love about the Chemisphere House, done 30 years ago, is that it was a response to keep the landscape pristine. Here was an unbuildable site. Most cases, you would have gotten a developer in there who would have padded that site, brought the bulldozers in, cut and filled, and said, John, put one simple stalk of concrete up and set the house on that. He left that environment the way he found it. It isn't he tried to do a spaceship that landed. No. It's what Frank Lloyd Wright used to talk about, organic architecture. I think John expresses it in that spirit. He is developing a structure that is unique to the site, unique to the user, unique to the materials.
If you want to create a new idea and build it, you just have one continuous fight against the status quo. The only way I've been able to get anything done is I've had clients who agreed, and we fight the contractors and we fight the bankers and we fight everybody, and we finally get it done. The basic idea for this house, which I arrived at actually the next day after being up on the hill here with him, I thought of this idea of saving the hilltop. So this arch over leaves it open through to the mountains and the sea, and leaves the hilltop completely free. So it's a private glassed-in original hilltop. In designing a building or solving an architectural problem, the major element is the interior space that you create, which is first of all a human space, a free space. From that derives the structure and the detail and the whole thing. There's very little drawing, there's a lot of thinking. I get the basic facts of what's existing or to exist, and then I beat my brains out about how to do whatever is necessary for the whole project. Sometimes I sit for hours before I draw anything, and sometimes I don't get it till 2 or 3 days later.
Silvertop was a home, basically. It started out as a home, and it was an experimental home. But a lot of questions arose, such as, when would it ever be complete? What kind of problems would evolve in the construction of it? There were new ideas being introduced all the time, partly because I'm an inventor, and it's partly because John was receptive to experimentation. And I was probably stimulated by some of his thinking about what was needed in architecture.
He got interested in the architecture so much that We had meetings about how to do everything, so we designed everything right from scratch and made it right from scratch. There isn't a stock item in this whole house.
The driveway that we constructed and the city wouldn't give us a permit on, we decided to fight the city. We demanded that they give us a permit, and they said we're not going to have a permit. And so through my attorneys, we brought legal action against the city and demanded that they making a load test, see if the load test would prove them to be structurally sound. The test was made, it was proved eminently safe, and they gave a permit and so on.
We not only had a problem with the driveway, almost every idea I ever had, some technical aspect of it did not technically fit the code. Actually, we got something like 40 permits before we were through. It wasn't just the driveway, it was 40 deviations from the code, and I've had that all my life. Arthur Elrod, being an interior designer, knew much more than most people about houses, but he wanted something more. When he came to me, he had seen some of my work. He said, "Give me what you think I should have on that property." The typical client would be much more fussy, finicky, and not understanding the whole idea, but he was looking for architecture. I had this whole lot excavated another 8 feet to expose the rock outcrops so that we could make a design that was integrated with the desert. And the first design I made and model, he loved and went ahead and did it. By doing it this way, it's almost like a desert flower, and these clear stories go around so you get a different sunlight as the sun moves around. It fits right into the desert. This is an example of improving life and suiting the situation. But what I tell students, after 30 or 40 years of good work, you begin to get a decent client who trusts you, and then you're free to really contribute, and you have total responsibility. My clients are all pretty strong individuals, or they wouldn't come at all. They're just individuals who happen to discover some values of architecture, and they discover that they like things that I've done, that there's feeling and there's character, and they recognize it. It doesn't matter what the budget is. If somebody's interested in architecture, I could do it. I could do a beautiful job with drywall, but I wouldn't do it because it's phony. It's cardboard. All I want to know is their basic physical requirements, whatever it is, so that I can create the biggest and best kind of spaces. And then any idiosyncrasies or likes, dislikes in environment or materials, and then I have a clue to something that will specifically suit that situation. That can all be done in about 10 minutes.
The house was like a healing instrument of some kind. I'd come into the house, it was fantastic. It was like taking 100 aspirins every night. You know, it was like just completely mellowing and nurturing. And it was because of the organic nature of the house. It's like living outside because it's all glass and redwood and brick. And it's wedged into the hillside. So about a third of the house is cantilevered out, but when you live in it, it's like you're outside all the time. It's like you're never inside. And yet, you know, when it's raining and cold outside, it's warm inside. And when it's very hot outside, it's cool inside. But you always feel like you're outside, because wherever you look, you don't ever see a wall.
It's kind of like an intimate, elegant cocoon. And the quality of openness and light, at the same time feeling totally private. And it's a very inside-outside life. Just the energy here is so different. It really impacts people like they just landed, got off a jet in Hawaii. Just feels wonderful to live in it.
The wind was one of the major factors because I stayed in a motel in Palm Springs when I first came down here, and it rattled so much I couldn't sleep. So I decided it had to be something that didn't rattle, for one thing. And then as a repeating space for a motel, I had to devise something so you're not just open on the ends or boxed into an air-conditioned box. So by having the sloping concrete roofs and clear story, everyone sees the sky and has an interior garden, and the other side has a skylit wall. This is one of a group that I did just after the war with prefabricated system for erecting a roof first. And then I thought, a great idea, because you can get a roof prefabricated and erected on a subcontract, and all you have to do is fill in between the roof and the floor, and you got a house, however much you can afford to close in. And if you can't, you have a future area that you can close in, and you end up with a total entity. I mean, it was impossible to build during the war, and it was impossible to build after the war, and of course, as far as that goes, it's impossible to build right now. But he built it himself with several doctor friends and 2 or 3 good carpenters on weekends, total in 6 months. And nowadays, you know, they talk about high tech, it'd be 2 years before they get it done.
John says, well, you know, after all, every house that you do is a problem. You have to solve a problem, which is how people can live in a house and still have the house be something that will grow and live with them and not confine them.
The quality of this house, is to compare it to a normal Beverly Hills house, is so different. And it's different in many ways that you have to get used to. We now are John Lautner advocates. We think he's the greatest. I thought he was when we first saw the house, and I fell in love with it, as Joan did. But after a while, we felt that maybe he didn't understand how people live in houses. And we've now come to the conclusion that he did, and that it was our problem, not his.
So far, we haven't added any new space to the house. We've only been upgrading everything that was there before, trying to bring in the latest in technology, many things that weren't possible back in 1962 when the house was first built. The way that the glass is now done in the downstairs area wasn't possible back in 1962. In fact, we had to go through a lot of experiments on it, trial and error, to achieve what we finally achieved down there.
The original idea of the whole living room was to get a perforated light like you get in a primeval forest. But I've been in one in northern Michigan where there's still a few primeval forests, and that light is just magnificent. There are 750 old-fashioned glasses in that roof, and the owners cemented them in themselves.
I said, I'd like to have a window above the sink instead of a wall so that I can see the view while I'm standing at the sink. So then John took it one step further and said, well, how about if we have a glass sink? Because I've always wanted to do a glass sink. And so I said, sure, that sounds great. So that's sort of typical of the way the two of us work together. He throws out his ideas, I throw out mine, and I feel as though I'm participating with him in the design of every little detail that goes on, and I enjoy doing that. It's really been a very creative thing for me.
I can't begin to tell you how many evenings I sit in the living room looking at the different lines and curves and angles of the house, working together like a complex piece of sculpture. Often we shift from one chair to another just to get perspectives and to point out to each other various details that are more accentuated from one time to another due to lighting changes, the sky, and glass reflections. We get so much pleasure from this house that the more you are in it and become a part of it, the more beautiful it becomes.
As far as the Stevens house is concerned, the client wanted 5 bedrooms, baths, a swimming pool, and so on, which normally wouldn't even fit on that piece of land. A little 30-foot wide lot. Typically, you get a box with windows on each end. It's a great solution for townhouses. The row house, townhouse, has been a problem all over the world, and it's never really been well solved. But this one, it opens up and frees people instead of closing them in. In the Bob Hope house, Mr. and Mrs. Hope were interested, they said initially, in not a large house, but they did want to entertain, in fact, even for presidents.
How are you? From Bob Hope's home in Palm Springs, we bring you Bob Hope's Yellow Ribbon Party.
My basic scheme, which they liked immediately, was to make a smaller private house on the second level and a large open area with guest rooms and so forth on the ground level for entertainment.
Tell the kitchen it's an emergency, will you?
I just saw on TV the yellow ribbon ceremony, and you could see at least 500 people sitting down for dinner, so the entertainment house really works beautifully. When I first showed it to Bob, the model, for final approval at his Toluca Lake house, it was on the billiard table, and he walked around and around looking at it, and finally he said, well, at least when they come down from Mars, they'll know where to go. 8 years. We've been involved in every square inch. So we've been doing final things and checking things all continuously during the whole construction process. When he came to me, he said, I've been a Clydesdale, you know, the workhorse, 12 hours a day for my whole life. I want a whole new world in an 8-car garage. The model here shows the whole property on the Pacific. I have a total concept, and then I make a rough cardboard model. I use models instead of renderings because renderings are misleading and people don't understand what they are. But with a model, you know what you're getting. Actually, we got going on the working drawings through photographing the model and ultimately defined it for construction. None of these are radius curves. The whole thing is free. These free curves are very subtle kinds of things to design and even more to define in working drawings for construction.
Its process is continuous, so the best project is always going to be the next one.
By having a structure where the ceiling is curving up and out, it just reflects the landscape or the sky, and the bathrooms are sunk half level down with gardens on top, and the storage is in the attic, so there are no walls. This will be the panorama, and then you come down here to a garden motor court, and then the pool is on the edge, so when you're in there you just look over water to space. When you get a solution that's even better than you expect yourself, that keeps you alive. I guess I just love architecture, that I really devoted my life to it. I'm completely involved with it to such an extent that 50 years have gone by and I feel like it was about 5 or 10 years, and I don't know what the hell happened to 40 years because I was involved. The spirit, that's a extremely difficult thing to describe in words. Of course, it's difficult to describe it physically. I think that any work of art has to have a spirit, has to have a feeling in order to be really art. If it's alive, it's art. If it's static and dead, it's not. So that's a very difficult thing to get in, and that's where you have to get exactly the right shapes, whether they're angular or curved, so they have a lift or a feeling. It's an instinctive kind of thing that when I make a plan, it either looks right or it doesn't, and I change it so that everything goes together. It's indefinable, and sometimes, of course, I don't know whether I'm going to achieve all of those things, but in most instances I have.
We feel that Lautner deserves a place in the list of the great architects of the 20th century. Like Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, Frank Lloyd Wright. and Lautner should be on that list.
I think one of the most stunning architecture moments for me was visiting Ronchamp, which is by Le Corbusier, and then Unité, also amazing. And then, of course, I find so many of Lautner's buildings give that same feeling of just a total wow. You walk into a Lautner home and you feel moved somehow.
When people actually get the chance to see Lautner buildings and walk through them, it is a sort of profound experiential moment that is rather different than, say, what we think of as a high modernist experience of space.
Lautner was always so much ahead of his time that's also interesting to see that, like, the world is now ready for the beautiful curves that he did them already long before the computer. And he did it with his own technique, using cardboard models, and photographing them and projecting them, and try to sketch over it. And now it's done by a computer.
Obviously, what has changed so dramatically is the digitization of our lives and the fact that architects now, they can design an entire building without doing a sketch. The technology has changed, and that's having impacts on how buildings are built. And so I'm sure John would be completely fascinated by it. Were he alive, it would be fascinating to know what he would do with these new tools, given that he used his pencil and drew sketches that purely served the building. Everything that he did was about building, building, building. I wish John had been able to do more schools and libraries and affordable housing. You know, I wish he'd actually been able to build for a wider public. I think he expressed a kind of humanity that would have been so meaningful to so many people.
Almost everybody who worked for John Lautner at one time or another worked on this house. Duncan continued with the ongoing work. Much of it was designed with John Lautner's input.
To this very day, this house is still a laboratory where they experimented with new architecture, new elements. So this house is just continuously moving.
The James Turrell Sky Space at the Sheets Goldstein House is a really important addition to that property because they're both very invested in the framing of viewing, but they're doing it in different ways. And each of these artists, whether it's a light and space artist like Turrell or an architect like Lautner, they were each invested very directly in the framing of vision and the development of different ways of seeing.
Jim Goldstein, the present owner, participated in all the process of design and construction to the point that I would tell him, well, you're just as good as a good architect. When people would ask him, well, Mr. Goldstein, when are you going to finish all this construction? He would just smile and say, never.
We went up to Silvertop for the first time, and it rocked my world. I've never seen anything like it. Silvertop would have a hard time being built today because that was built in the era of hope. Back when that house was built from the 50s to the 60s, America was that, you know, like we were just getting ready to go into outer space. It was built by guys who were like, we're working on the greatest, most futuristic house ever.
In particular at Silvertop, Lautner went to the hilltop, staked out the kind of curving floor plan on site, and then adjusted those curves based on the particular orientations that Lautner was developing. Lautner's work is, I think, undoubtedly ocular-centric, meaning he starts with the views and then makes other architectural moves in order to frame that specific view.
We're getting to work on Silvertop, which is one of the most monumental achievements of Lautner's work. The fun thing about it is conceptually to think not like what would John have done exactly at that, like not to kind of create some new fake John thing in there, but there is this idea that you can have a sort of invisible layers without it necessarily interfering with the historic monument status.
Drone photography is an attempt to intensify the enveloping quality of a lot of Lautner's panoramas to try to create understanding of the work itself. And I'm interested in this because it gives architects new tools, new techniques they can use to develop different modes of viewing, to frame viewing differently, to construct views in unexpected ways, and really to innovate visually as architects.
He made, for instance, a beautiful house done with very thin steel wires to keep up the roof. It was a very low budget house that was built by the owners themselves.
Johnny Delaveau masterminded the construction of my house, as well as the Carling and Harpel houses. My house consisted of 3 separate structures, connected by a suspended cable roof and joined in the center by the canopy of vines. The cables are anchored at each of 3 corners by deadweights sunk into the ground and connected by concrete compression beams that form the foundation and counteract the tension in the cables. The cables stretch over the top of a concrete bridge, divide in 2 directions, span the open courtyard, pass over another concrete bridge, secured at each end by the anchors. Lautner had been innovative enough to create the idea of a polyurethane roof supported by cables rather than the conventional roof structure. This meant that I could maintain the desired concept, but for less money. I really appreciated that.
As he designed car dealerships, markets, drive-in restaurants, as well as houses. And those are the buildings of daily life, which really inspired a whole set of fresh ideas about modernism for the average person that anybody could enjoy.
What we see now, when his complete body of work is finished, that no 2 projects are the same. He would invent some solution for a problem, but when he would come up with the same problem a second time, he would invent something new again. And he kept on doing that for over 50 years, which is really unique.
Architecture is for people. In order to have a desirable environment, it should have not only truth and beauty, but heart and spirit and everything else. In architecture, it's an extremely subtle kind of thing where you have to design, whether it's angular or curved or whatever, the proportions at a certain point with a certain juxtaposition, they have a spirit, they have a feeling, they have a life. For instance, in a church, a big classical church, the high, long nave sometimes has a spirit and sometimes it doesn't. And that's a proportion. And it seems to me that some of the new ones, even though they've had excellent construction and detail and windows, etc., but the whole space, it doesn't have the lifting proportion of width to height and so forth. And of course, it's even more intangible in curved and angular spaces. It's partly instinctive. It's a feeling that you have to incorporate in the design. When you understand it, the potential goes to infinity.